Okay, welcome everyone. This is the third episode of my podcast. I'd just like to start out by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live, work, study, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. They are the traditional owners of this land. I'd like to pay my respect to Aboriginal elders, past, present and emerging. Some people are a little bit sceptical about doing an acknowledgement to country. Look, I personally think it's the least we can do. Anyway, it only takes a few minutes, so I just think, anyway. So today I thought that I would talk about resources. So essentially, I in no way intend for my podcast to be a one-stop shop for everything you might need to know or want to invest or learn through about when it comes to the subjects of self-development, self-knowledge, and self-growth. In fact, as I said in my first podcast, I'm a student of this. Certainly not a master. You'll never hear me referring to myself as a guru. And the day that anybody else talks about me as being a guru, I will encourage that person to expand their horizons, because I think that this is one of those subject matters. Well, like really with anything these days, to be honest, never rely on one source for your information about things, because different people's experiences, different people's perspectives, their educational background, where they've travelled in the world, who they've spoken to, all of these things, form a complex tapestry that enables some people to speak with wisdom about this subject, I believe, and so I really want to encourage anyone who, especially if you're just starting out on a journey of self-awareness and self-growth, I really want to encourage you to spread your wings. And I'm going to just go through what I have found to be the most helpful of all of the materials that I have and currently still do digest in this space. And I have read a lot of self-help books. I think there was one stage, at which I think I'd read at least 50% of the books that were on the shelves in the self-help section at my local bookstore. It doesn't mean that the other ones aren't valid. However, obviously I'm only going to talk about the ones that I thought were particularly important and that particularly helped me. So I will start out on the subject of books, and I have a few of them here on my copies. Most of the ones that I've read that a lot of the ones that I've read, I should say, I have passed on to other people. Maybe I'll get them back or maybe I won't, but that's okay, because having consumed the contents myself, I feel like it's better to have passed those on to somebody who has not had an opportunity yet to hear that particular person's opinions and suggestions about these things. And so I'm not expecting to get those books back, but maybe I will one day. I'm not sure. I'm not too concerned. Okay, so I will start out with the Eckhart Tolle. So now Eckhart Tolle was the very, very first self-help type book that I read, which really resonated with me and which really helped me. And I read Eckhart Tolle when I was going through a very, very dark period of my life. I was super sad, super depressed. I was miserable. And I was desperately seeking anything to get me out of it. And I was seeing psychologists, I was seeing psychiatrists. They weren't really being of very much help. And then I can't remember. Oh no, I can remember. It was Oprah Winfrey, who I personally have huge admiration for. I think it's hard not to admire Oprah Winfrey. She's done and she's made an extraordinary career for herself. And the most beautiful thing about Oprah is that she has always been very transparent and very honest about her own struggles with issues, whether they were psychological, whether they were spiritual, whether they were to do with her weight. That's obviously one of her, I think still her most watched episode ever is the one where she goes on the fasting shake diet and loses a bunch of weight, and then she just regains it all. She's always put herself out there, and I really admire that. I really admire that about her. And so she recommended Eckhart Tolle. I remember seeing him on her show many years ago now. And then I went on to read, first of all, his book, The Power of Now. Oh no, first it was, The Power of Now. And then I read A New Earth. And those books they have some similarities. One is a little bit more autobiographical, and the other one is a little bit more sort of just theoretical. And then this one is actually a book called Practicing the Power of Now, which is sort of, I guess, more, it's a good, it's a good like book if you just want a sort of shortened, abbreviated summation of what he teaches in those books. And it also has some, some practical exercises, not super practical, but he poses some questions to the reader that might help them to sort of think about the things that he's teaching. And essentially this is a book about mindfulness. What he teaches is very much about mindfulness. He's a big fan of meditation, as are so many of these self-help gurus. The title, The Power of Now, all has to do with the fact that we as a society spend so much time ruminating on the past or worrying about the future. And we can seem to completely miss the fact that the only moment that we really have is now. The past has happened, and it's not to say that you should ignore what's happened to you in the past, because especially if you've been through trauma, there is a lot to be said for finding ways to heal that trauma, especially if that trauma gets reactivated throughout your life, in current events in your life. However, ruminating too much about the past, and ignoring the present, or for that matter, spending all of your time worrying about what's going to happen in the future, or maybe not even worrying about it, maybe just fantasizing. I shouldn't say fantasizing necessarily, because it's important to believe that things are possible for you. That's sort of what the book The Secret is all about, which is not one of my favorites. I don't necessarily recommend that book, but that's just because there are elements of that book and that whole sort of theory that I like, but overall I find it to be a little bit what's the word? I find overall like that the whole idea of manifesting what you want in your life by by having these mind boards, or these vision boards, or whatever, I find that all to be a little bit too hocus pocus. And that's not, there are plenty of people out there who would disagree. There are plenty of people out there who very much believe in that, and that's fine. Honestly, what works for one person is not going to be what works for everyone. Oprah Winfrey herself said that. She said that about weight loss many years ago. She said, if there was a secret to losing weight, I'd have found it, and I'd have told Jaws about it. To quote her, I think more or less. Well, more or less. It's an approximate quote. So yeah, so the future, you can spend a lot of time thinking about the future, and that's there again. There's nothing wrong with thinking about the future. It's good to have goals. It's good to have ambition, and it's good to have a plan for, you know, for how you're going to achieve your goals. However, it's very important to remember that you cannot achieve anything without doing something right now, or maybe doing nothing right now, depending on how you're feeling. And so the power of now is really all just about like coping with the present moment. If the present moment is one in which you're suffering, you know, learning to sit through that suffering, to remember that it won't be forever, that, you know, literally that expression, this too shall pass, is really powerful. In the 12-step program, we say one day at a time. You know, it could be 1 hour at a time for some people. I mean, when you are living in a very turbulent situation, you know, like I mentioned previously, I was in an extremely violent relationship for many years. I mean, it is the closest that we, you know, in today's day and age, that I think we will ever know to really being in flight, fight or freeze mode constantly, you know, and you know, and so when you are constantly in a state of heightened or depressed emotion, what matters is how you cope with it in the moment. And then when you're not, you know, those are the moments when you can, you know, really start working towards visualizing, planning, and moving towards, you know, a future that you desire. Which brings me on to my second book, and I don't have this one anymore because I did, I read it and then I gave it away, which is a book written by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Joe Dispenza is a neurobiologist, I believe. Originally, he's not a medical doctor; he's a PhD, and he still works as a professor of neurobiology or neuroscience. And he wrote a book. He's written many books, but the one that I want to recommend is called Breaking the Habit of Being You. And in that book, he really describes how if you want to manifest, there's that word again, you know, things for yourself, you can start doing that now, even before the good thing that you want, the place where you want to get to, the you know, the change that you want to have in your life. You can start working towards that change now simply by working on modulating your emotional state in the present moment, as if you already had gotten to where you wanted to be. And it's a tricky thing to do. Joe Dispenza has a lot of material online, you know, and you can look up, you can certainly hear his whole ebook, I think it's 4 hours though, on YouTube. He's been interviewed on numerous podcasts. I think he also has other teaching resources, and I know he has a lot of guided meditations on YouTube as well. He's a fascinating man. I don't necessarily fully agree with everything he says, but that one book, Breaking the Habit of Being You, I think is really worth reading. It is on the longer side, but you know, I think it's worth picking up and having a look at. So the third book that I'm going to recommend is one by Mark Manson. Again, this is one that I gave away, and it's called, and excuse my profanity, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have overemphasized it when I said the F word then. So Mark Manson's a pretty cool guy. And this book is pretty cool, you know, like you know, it's about like sort of just trying to distance yourself from the judgment of the world, you know, trying to distance yourself from your own judgment, you know, and so that you can reshape your future and reshape the person that you are even now, in a way that is more in keeping with what will work for you, and what is working for you now, and what will work for you in the future. So you can find Mark Manson again on YouTube. He actually has he did his own book summary of that book, so it's about 20-minute YouTube video. So if you don't want to read the book, check out his. Oh, I'm bouncing again. He did that YouTube video. So yeah, it's about a 20-minute summary of his book. So watch that at the very least. Like, I recommend it. He's an interesting guy. Okay, and so the third book that I'm going to recommend is this one, and it's by Russell Brand. And I know Russell Brand's a controversial figure at the moment. Look, I don't think that Russell Brand himself would deny that he has a pretty, what's the word? Well, let's just say that he's made a lot of mistakes in his life, and he recognizes that. He is a recovering addict of heroin, crack cocaine, sex, alcohol, and yeah, he was not always a well-behaved boy at all. But he does have some really interesting things to say, and his current podcast, look, I used to watch it. It's gotten just a little bit too extreme, so I don't watch it very much anymore. I preferred it when it was The Truths. The Truths I thought was excellent, but this book, Recovery, if you are suffering from issues with addiction, this is Russell Brand's take on the 12 steps, as they are described in AA, in NA, in Codependence Anonymous. GA, I believe, is also a 12-step program. And so if you are trying to decide whether to maybe join a 12-step program, or if you are in a 12-step program but you want an alternate perspective, he just sort of rewrites it and then talks about his own experience working through the 12 steps. So I found that really useful because even though I am in a 12-step program, I don't always resonate with everything that is sort of said in that program, and like Russell Brand, I don't have belief in a designated God, in a God that has a name. I don't refer to the higher power that I believe in as God. I think it's fine if you do, but because those programs are, well, at least once upon a time they were so heavily indoctrinated around the concept of God. The 12 steps of NA or AA can be very sort of heavy on the God higher power stuff, and if you struggle with your own understanding of a higher power, your belief in a higher power, then this book is quite refreshing. It's quite refreshing because neither does Russell Brand. Okay, so the next book I'm going to recommend is by James Clear. Now this is a bit of an oddball perhaps, and it's called Atomic Habits. Now James Clear's a really interesting guy as well. Like, he was a software engineer, and then he wrote one book called I can't remember, it was called Atomic something else, but it was all about coding and that sort of thing. And then he wrote Atomic Habits, and it just flew to the New York Times bestseller, to the top of the New York Times bestseller list. He's now considered to be he does talks all around the world, talking about how to break habits, how to form habits. It's a really useful book to read, I think, if you want to take some steps to improving the sort of, I guess, the habits that we all have in life, and we all have them, and a habit doesn't have to be something that's as typical as like smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol or rolling your eyes, we have a lot of our behavior in life is habitual, and habits can be both helpful and non-helpful. And Atomic Habits really sort of helps you to break down those habits that you have in life which are helpful and those which are unhelpful, and then gives you some strategies for working on improving or changing those non-helpful habits without doing the old replacing one for another, which is a tried and tested technique. Okay. And then the last book that I'm going to recommend is like a bit of a look, I don't expect many people to chime with this one. This is actually a book by Albert Campus. Albert Campus is a philosopher. He was pretty late in the, he came onto the scene much later than the sort of traditional philosophers that you might think about, Socrates, Aristotle, those guys. However, he has some really interesting things to say, especially, again, as I said, if you are secular, if your belief system is secular. And this is just one of his books. This one's called The Rebel. He's got quite a few. I've read 2 or 3 of them. They're all worth reading. They're all worth investigating, in my opinion. Like, especially if you're someone who finds yourself being a little bit outcast from society, feel a little bit like you're unaccepted, or you're unappreciated, or that people just don't get you, and it's not written in that like kind of really over the top. Like if you've ever read any Aldous Huxley, like his stuff is just so like, it's like it's almost like he's deliberately writing it so that like the average person just has to sit there with a bloody dictionary looking up every second word. Like Campus doesn't write like that. He writes for a lay audience, and so it's really quite helpful. He provides an alternate philosophical point of view for people who perhaps are struggling with the belief system in which they were brought up, or whom just like myself never had one growing up, but yet have struggled their whole life with coming to grips with the big questions in life, like who am I and how do I fit in and why am I here and all that, existential stuff, yeah. Okay, so I think that's it for the books. And then I'm going to move on to podcasts, right? So now I listen to a ton of podcasts. I will link all of them in the description, so you can check them all out yourself. And I would say that, well, actually, they're not all podcasts, but most of them are podcasts. So I would say and I'll read them out more or less, in order of my recommendations. So the first one that I think that everyone should watch is Alan Watts. Now, Alan Watts doesn't have a podcast. He's dead. He died a number of years ago. He was most famous in the 1970s, and it's we're very, very fortunate that when he was a professor at, I think, Cambridge, something like that, that a lot of his lecturing material and stuff was recorded, and so there is literally hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on YouTube for free of him talking about his sort of worldview and his philosophy and his take on things, and he studied and as a sort of as a man, I think he might have studied philosophy at school, or maybe psychology, I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter because he doesn't really fit into either of those two sort of stereotypes. Like, he traveled the world, he studied Zen Buddhism, he studied Hinduism, he studied like all the major religions, and he came to his own conclusions and his own thoughts about things, but he's not preaching. He doesn't preach anything. He just talks about them. And between Eckhart Tolle and Alan Watts, like, they pretty much saved my life. Like, they really did. Like, you know, Alan Watts has a beautiful way of talking about things, especially talking about the interconnectedness of the world and the relationship between myself, another person, our natural environment, you know, and how we are innately, you know, there's something about the human mind that we feel different. We feel like our physical body, and, you know, in some way separates us from everything else, and it does to a certain extent, obviously. However, you know, like, if you sort of can shift your mind a little bit, you know, away from that, you know, to thinking about us as a functioning ecosystem, you know, and realize that, you know, I only know who I am as a mirror of you, right? You know, because how do I know what characteristics, like, I have or that I value in myself? Well, I look at other people and I see what characteristics I value in other people, or I see what characteristics I really don't like in other people. And, you know, I mean, and so everything that, you know, so much of, like, what makes us think we are who we are really only exists because of our ecosystem and because of our interactions with other people, and also with animals, with plants, with, you know, the all of the biodiverse you know, elements that exist in nature. And that's so that's just one of Alan Watts's many things that he talks about. Check him out. If you just YouTube Alan Watts, so much stuff comes up. Honestly, like, some videos are long, some videos are short. He's got the most beautiful voice. Sometimes I just love to put it on just to go to sleep to, and other times I'll put it on to pay attention to, you know, because he has got some really awesome stuff to say. Awesome stuff to say. Like, okay, so the next one is Chris Williamson. Now, Chris Williamson is a young bloke. He's a Brit. He actually got famous, or semi-famous, by being on Love Island, of all things. And now he has a podcast about self-development. It's called Modern Wisdom. He's got nearly 2 million subscribers now. He's doing super well. You know, he's been on Joe Rogan. You know, he's had Jordan Peterson on his podcast like twice. Like, he's now making really good money from it. Like, and I take my hat off to the guy. I really do. He hasn't, although his channel is monetized to a certain extent. You know, it's not like he is making it subscriber only. You know, and he says that he intends never to do that. He interviews some really interesting people, and he's very intelligent. He's incredibly intelligent for a young, good-looking bloke who was on Love Island. Like, he is remarkably intelligent. Like, and he really does his research before he has guests on, and he asks them some really insightful questions. And there really is a lot of modern wisdom to be gained from his podcasts. They do tend to be rather long. In fact, the last one that I watched was 3 hours. I know, and I know that's a really long time, you know. So, you know, look, it's a bit tricky, but check him out anyway. Like, you know, if you're a woman, you know, you'll probably like to watch a little bit just for the eye candy, because he is really a very good-looking bloke. Okay, the next podcast that I'm going to recommend is by Durqum, and his podcast is called Know Thyself. Now he is not doing quite as well as Chris Williamson. I think he's got about 500,000 subscribers, but it's a sort of a similar type thing. And he also has some really, really interesting guests on his podcast, and takes a slightly different sort of approach to it than Chris Williamson does. You know, like he is more, I guess, interested in spirituality, and in spiritual enlightenment kind of stuff, than Chris Williamson, who's more interested in just things, you know, finding out interesting things from people who might know interesting things. And he's very pleasant to listen to, very pleasant to watch. You know, his podcasts are very, he sits there barefoot, cross-legged most of the time, well, as I am right now, actually, not that you can see my feet, but, and so it's very informal. It's a very informal sort of podcast, and I think, he's had some really interesting people on his show, and it's definitely worth checking out. The next one that I'm going to recommend is Andrew Huberman. He's a neurobiologist. Now his stuff is a little bit harder to digest if you don't have a background in science, but he tries to make it fairly easy to understand. And he's mostly talking about mind hacks, I guess, for lack of a better word, and about the stuff that we have discovered about how, neuroplasticity, is a tool that we can all actually tap into, in order to create change in our life. It's, I say way too much. So it's about neuroplasticity. It's about neuroplasticity. So if you're interested in how the human mind functions, and also about how you can essentially, use what is known about how the human mind works in order to affect change for yourself, then that's a good podcast to check out. Okay, so the next one is Jordan Peterson. Now, I have a disclaimer about Jordan Peterson. Look, I have a love-hate relationship with Jordan Peterson. I think he's an amazing man. I think he's incredibly intelligent. I love the fact that he says what he thinks. I love the fact that he's so outspoken. I don't agree with everything he says, not even close. In fact, he's said some things, which I really have been like, whoa, hang on a minute, back up. But that's not to say that you shouldn't listen to it, because I think, I'm a big believer that, much like, when there's an election coming up and you're trying to decide who to vote for, it's no good just to it's no good to just read the material that's coming from the person that you're already thinking about voting for. I mean, you really want to understand all sides of an argument before and arrive at your own decision. That's very important to me, So even when Jordan Peterson is saying stuff that I think maybe I don't agree with, or is saying things that are controversial, or I'm glad for that. I'm glad for the opportunity to have him challenge my own thoughts, and also I've found watching Jordan Peterson's podcasts that it has raised a lot of questions for me that I'd never really considered before. It's raised a lot of topics, that I guess I had not had an opinion on, and still don't have an opinion on, but it's put those things on my awareness, on my radar, and I think that that's always interesting and quite important. So then I'm going to move into Humanists UK. Now, once again, if you have faith in a religious sect, I think that's wonderful for you. I always wished that I did. However, I don't, and I never have had, and my attempts to convert to a religion have failed every time. So I consider myself a secular humanist, and Humanists UK is just a really good podcast for people who are secular humanists. It's not just about I think there's a real misconception about atheism that that atheists are anti-God and that we're trying to disprove the existence of God or whatever. I mean, it's not nothing is true from the nothing could be truer from the nothing could be less true. Atheists don't believe because we feel that there is insufficient evidence to allow us to believe. That's not to say that in the future that evidence may not present itself, and secular humanism is about a lot more than just a religious position. It's not a religious position. It's just a place for people who don't have a religious position, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So check it out if you too struggle with a religious faith that maybe you were brought up in, and or if you have already decided, I guess that you are, or for that matter, if you are a Christian, or if you are Jewish, or if you are I'm reluctant to recommend it to people who are Buddhists or Hindu, because I sort of think those aren't really religions in my opinion. Those are more practices. But or if you're if you believe in Islam, check it out. Check out what the humanists have to say. Like I said, it's not all about religion. In fact, most of it's not about religion, because that would be a really, really boring. That would be a really boring podcast. I find their feed to be quite interesting. And then last but not least, well, actually, it might be least, but not because it's bad, just because they don't put new content up very often, is a podcast called EinzelGanger. EinzelGanger? Okay, my German is very rusty. Like I said, I will link it in the description box. And I'm not sure what that word translates to from the German. I really should have looked that up now that I think about it. Again, it's just a podcast about self-development and about self-growth, and about about living life in a world where uncertainty is high and and growing all the time, where there's so much conflict in where we're so conflicted in our lives, and where so many people are suffering from feeling misunderstood and lost and sort of outcast, so that's the last one, and then I did also have a couple more here. Oh my god, a couple more. Well, I'm already at 38 minutes, so I think I will actually end this episode now, because I don't want to run these too long, as I said. And maybe I'll just quickly go over these last ones in my next podcast. So just to finish up, let me see. Do I have anything I want to recommend that I watched recently? Not particularly, I don't think. Not that's springing to mind. I have seen a couple of quite good documentaries lately, but yeah, but not perhaps that I can remember the names of. I should just briefly mention apps. So there's a lot of mindfulness meditation. There's a lot of self-help type apps. They all have subscriptions associated with them. There's only two that I use. One is called Insight Journal. Insight Journal will cost you about $60-$70 a year, and it's not bad. It provides you a prompt. Or it has a selection of them. It provides you a journaling prompt, and then then you write about that, and then it asks you. It has an AI engine in it, so it reads what you've written and asks you to speak about it more. And look, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's not quite worth the money, I don't think, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And then the other app that I have recently subscribed to is Sam Harris's app, Waking Up. Now, I know Sam Harris, again, is a very controversial figure for many. I happen to like him. His app is probably the most expensive that I have encountered in terms of subscription rate. He wants $20 or 20 Australian dollars a month. However, if you contact them, the people who are behind the app, if essentially if you sign up for a free 7-day trial and then you contact them and tell them that you're flat on your ass broke, they'll give it to you for free. Yeah. So Sam Harris is and same with Sam Harris's podcast, which is subscriber only, but he'll totally give it to you for free if you contact them and tell them that you can't afford it. So Waking Up is a really great app for meditation, mindfulness, and also he has a lot of people on there telling their stories or sort of talking about subjects in this space. I'm listening at the moment to Amanda Knox, who I have incredible admiration for. For those of you who maybe don't remember, or maybe just weren't around at the time when the Amanda Knox controversy, can I even call it that, was going on. Amanda Knox is an American. She was taking a 1 year what do you call it? She was in Italy for a year. She went to Italy to work and study and find herself for a year when she was very young, before she went to college, or maybe 1 year into college, something like that. And she was staying with with another American girl, with a British girl, I think her name, whose name was Meredith Kircher. Anyway, she came home one day to find that Meredith had been brutally murdered and raped, and essentially the cops pinned it on her, and she was put through all sorts of really terrible, definitely illegal, at least they would have been in Australia, and I dare say even in America, processes, including being interviewed without an interpreter, asked to sign a statement supposedly based on what she'd said, but it was in Italian and she couldn't understand it. So they essentially forced a confession out of her using these tactics, and then she was found guilty. She was found guilty of murder. She was sentenced to go to jail for 26 years, and it was only after DNA evidence proved that this known serial rapist was the one who raped Meredith Kircher. Had her conviction overturned, that Amanda Knox was freed and allowed to go back home. And she talks about resilience a lot on this on Sam Harris's Waking Up app, and she talks about her story. And there's also a really awesome documentary on Netflix called Amanda Knox. She's a remarkable woman, really, really remarkable, because she's gone through a lot, and she continues to go through a lot, because she's very, very famous, and she's not famous for any good reasons. She's known for being the girl. I mean, in the British press, I was living in Great Britain at the time when she was arrested and charged, and the British tabloids were just ruthless with her. And they spun all these stories about her being sexually deviant and all these terrible things, put her through hell. And and she continues to go through that hell in a sense, because everywhere she goes, people, as soon as they might not necessarily recognize her at first, but then they hear her name, they're like, you're that Amanda Knox, so. But rather than choosing to change her name and go hide somewhere, she instead is choosing to use the platform that she has to talk about how to survive through the trauma of being falsely imprisoned, how to rebuild your life, and essentially how she was able to continue to have hope in what seemed like a hopeless scenario. So I really do recommend those two apps. I sort of recommend Insight Journal. I really recommend Waking Up. Okay, all right, that's enough for one day. All right, I shall stop this. Hope everyone has a nice week, and I'll see you in the next one.